record here. Cliff Ennico. Cliff is a nationally recognized small business legal and tax expert and is best known as the former host of Money Hunt on PBS, where entrepreneurs defended their business plans before America's toughest panel of experts. Cliff is an attorney and a small business consultant here in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and has helped launch over 15,000 businesses. He is also the author of 16 books, most recently the Crowdfunding Handbook, How to Raise Capital for Your Business Using Equity Funding Portals. I'll now turn it over to Cliff.
Hey, thanks, Bob, and thanks as always for the wonderful introduction. Sorry that I'm a few minutes late. Let's get launched right into this. First of all, Bob did mention that I was a lawyer, and if you've ever worked with a lawyer before, we always tell you what we're not going to do before we tell you before we add value to anything. These are my usual disclaimers for SCORE programs. The most important one really is the second one. We may be getting into some legal and tax stuff on this program, which I'm happy to do, but there's a very big difference between giving out legal information and giving out legal advice. Those are two very different things. You know, talking generally about, hey, this is what the law is all about. That's what these programs are all about. But hey, Bob, this is what you should do. And Mary, this is why you should do something. And Brigida, this is why you should do something else. That's actual one-on-one advice, which I really can't do on a program like this. So if you hear something on this program and it sounds like a great idea and you do it and it doesn't work and your business fails, you go bankrupt, your spouse divorces you, the kids don't want to talk to you, the dog's peeing on your leg, and you're living in a diaper box under the Brooklyn Bridge, you can't sue anybody. Okay, that's what this disclaimer is really all about. So let's talk about art as a business. I have had the privilege in my 40-year career of working with literally hundreds of creative artists in virtually all media. Some have been successful, some have not been. And what we're going to talk about today is what makes the difference between a successful and an unsuccessful artistic business. But first, I want to give you guys a challenge. I call this the mystery of the missing Mozart cello concerto. Now, you don't have to be a classical music lover, but you probably know who Mozart was, right? Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart lived in the late 1700s in Austria, the subject of the famous Broadway musical Amadeus, probably one of the 3 or 4 greatest composers who ever existed. Okay, and Mozart was a genius. I mean, there was no two ways about it. There is no bad Mozart. You listen to anything by Mozart, it's wonderful stuff. He did not have a bad day, okay, in his entire 35-year career. Unfortunately, he was cut short at the age of 35 with a brain tumor. But here's a mystery, okay? When you look at Mozart's catalog, I mean, Mozart was a champion at writing a piece of music called the concerto. A concerto, for those of you who are not music lovers, is a piece of music where there's a solo instrument and an orchestra, and they talk to each other, basically, and usually it's 3 movements. And you can write a concerto for virtually any instrument in the orchestra. And Mozart was a champion concerto writer. He wrote 27 concertos for the piano forte, which later became the piano. He wrote 7 wonderful violin concertos. He wrote 4 concertos for the French horn, which at that time was just being introduced into the orchestra. It was a novel, radical instrument, radical innovation in the field of music. He wrote 4 of some of the best, I have friends who are French horn concertos. These are some of the most challenging pieces that have ever been written for the French horn. No question Mozart could write a concerto, but he never wrote a concerto for the cello. And he never did. And this has bugged musicologists a little bit, people who specialize in music history, because we know Mozart liked the cello. It was one of his favorite instruments. It was one of 4 or 5 instruments that he actually knew how to play. The cello is the instrument of the orchestra that most closely resembles the range of the human voice, and he absolutely loved it. Other composers of that time, guys like Haydn and Boccherini, wrote wonderful concertos for the cello, so it certainly could be done. Okay, his competition was doing great jobs with this, but he never wrote a cello concerto. Now, why is that? Why is that? Why is it that Mozart never, wrote a cello concerto? Well, I'll give you a hint if you're having trouble figuring this out. Okay, this is not a class in music history or musicology. This is a class on how to succeed as a small business person. If you think of Mozart as a creative genius, as a brilliant composer, a brilliant musician, you'll never get the answer to this question. But if you think of Mozart as a guy who wrote music for a living, this is how he fed his family, the answer is obvious. The reason why he never wrote a cello concerto was because he couldn't find anyone to pay him to write one. Mozart didn't just write whatever was in his head. He didn't put pen to or quill to parchment until somebody, a rich nobleman or somebody like that, crossed his palm with a few gold coins. Okay, and that's the thing. The reason why we have the four French horn concertos is that Mozart had a friend who was a very wealthy nobleman who had a son who was very enamored of the French horn and couldn't find music challenging enough for him. So the father paid Mozart to write the concertos for his son, so his son could show off his virtuosity on that instrument. That's why we have the four French horn concertos. He couldn't find a similar nobleman with a son that played the cello, which is why we don't have a cello concerto. So this is the reason why. Think of it this way. Great artists are great art. Don't get me wrong. Now, what I've just said doesn't take anything away from Mozart's genius. He was a genius. Everything he wrote was a work of incredible beauty and incredible art. But he did not choose what he wrote. His patrons chose, or it was a negotiation, probably. Hey Mozart, hey Wolfgang, we want you to write something, for the party next week. What do you got? Sounds like a flute concerto. Okay, great, let's do that. I'm sure there were conversations like that, not with the New York accent, obviously, but I'm sure there were conversations like that. Okay, art is a business. Okay, it's just a business like anything else. If you create anything that doesn't sell, it's called a hobby. That's what we call it. In fact, the IRS, you probably don't know this, but the IRS has actually a criteria for determining what's a hobby and what's a business. And one of the criteria is that if you want to take business deductions for whatever it is you're doing, the IRS requires that you make a profit sooner or later. They'll give you some time. They understand at the beginning you're not going to make any money. You're going to be selling, giving stuff away to friends in exchange for dinner, whatever. But at some point they expect you to make a profit. And if you don't, like within 2 or 3 years, they're going to say it's a hobby, which means you can't deduct any business expenses, business losses. It's not a good thing. Here are two famous artists, Vincent van Gogh and, Pablo Picasso. Forgive me. Maybe I know I sound a little cynical when I give this talk, especially to, younger people who are just getting started in this field, but the greatest artists in history, the most famous artists, have almost always been great business people as well. They knew how to make money as well as to make art. So here are two great artists, painters, Vincent van Gogh, Pablo Picasso. One ignored his market, the other worshipped. That was Vincent van Gogh. The other worshipped his market. Vincent van Gogh died penniless. They think he committed suicide. He created a ton of art in his latest 2 years, which are some of the most wonderful, beautiful works of art ever produced, but he never made a penny selling any of it. That's how he ended up. Picasso died in his well into his 80s, filthy rich, a multi-millionaire, several times older, the most famous, most popular artist in the world. He also did a lot of stuff in the latter part of his life. And let me tell you, a lot of it's crap too. There's a lot of bad Picasso. Okay, there's not too much bad Van Gogh, but there's a lot of bad Picasso that is out there. Go to any estate auction and there's a signed Picasso print going for $200, and it is genuine. It's not a fraud. It's not a fraud or anything like that. Which one would you rather end up as? Would you rather end up as Van Gogh, or would you rather end up as Picasso? I think I know the answer to that question. Both were geniuses. Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking either of them as an artist, but as businessmen, Picasso definitely had it all over Van Gogh. The fame and business success are not incompatible. A lot of artists, creative people that I deal with have this idea that you must suffer for your art, but it really isn't true. Shakespeare was actually quite well off. He was also, of course, a theater producer. That's how he made a lot of his money. He wrote plays to feed his theaters. But he apparently did quite well. He was making the equivalent of a six-figure income at the time he died. As did Mozart, by the way. The whole idea of Mozart dying in a garret, alone and penniless, he was making about the equivalent of about $250,000 a year in today's money when he died. He was doing okay. Mozart. He had some issues with some of his patrons toward the end. Picasso was a multimillionaire when he died, and a lot of it was just with stuff that is probably junk. Great art speaks to the eternal, not the transitional. Great art that only speaks to its time is not going to last, for the generations. But you will starve if it doesn't sell. One of the biggest mistakes that artists make is to make their stuff too contemporary. They make it so focused on the moment that, it may not stand the test of time. My wife and I saw a play at the Westport Country Playhouse here in Westport. It was a number of years ago. I don't remember the name of it, but it was authored by some of the people that wrote the South Park. So it was very funny, very contemporary. It was about a dysfunctional family, but it was absolutely hysterical. There were references all over the place to Barnes and Noble, to Amazon. And the jokes were extremely good. I mean, we were howling the entire hour and a half that we were in the theater. But as we left the theater, I remember, saying to my wife, I said, that play was wonderful. I don't think I've enjoyed a night in the theater as much as I have tonight in a long time. But let me tell you something. 10 years from now, no one is going to remember this play, because no one is going to remember all the pop culture references and stuff that were in this play. I mean, even now, 10 years later, I don't remember the title or the author. A lot of the stuff that they were talking about, renting movies from Blockbuster. I mean, nobody does that anymore. Okay, that's the problem. A lot of problems with older movies is you have to explain to your kids what things were and how things were done back then. Otherwise, they don't get a lot of what's happening right now. In order to stand the test of time, your work has to speak to the internal, not the transitional. And don't get me wrong. I mean, doing stuff that is very in the moment and pop culture savvy and whatnot is a good way to make money, but it will not guarantee lasting fame. Now, how many people remember who Margaret Keane was? Some of the boomers in the audience might remember. She was the painter back in the 60s who did those portraits of the kids with the big bulging eyes. And so that very popular at the time. I mean, these things were flying off the shelves. They were selling for millions of dollars. Now you can't give them away. Thomas Kincaid, he actually had a chain of art shops, art stores devoted to his artwork. He used to do pastoral scenes, mostly in wooded areas, a cottage in the middle of the woods with smoke coming out of the chimney. I mean, you can always recognize a Thomas Kincaid. Leroy Neiman, who just died recently, a couple of months ago, he was famous for his sports images. He was very much influenced by J.M.W. Turner, the English impressionist, and his paintings were all this up, but it was mostly like race cars and basketball players and stuff like that. Nobody remembers who he is today. Okay. Fame can be very fleeting. Here's a question for you music lovers. What do Bing Crosby, Burl Ives, Andy Williams, and Brenda Lee have in common? Okay, for those of you who are not familiar with them, they were all singers, and they were all pop singers. What do they all have in common? The answer is, here's what they have in common. During their lifetime, these people were extremely famous and extremely popular. Bing Crosby was one of the top 2 or 3 crooners of the 1920s, 1930s. That was a big deal back then. If you were a crooner in a big band, fronted a big band, you were a rock star. That's what the equivalent was of a rock star back in the 1920s and 30s. And there were 3 big crooners in the 1920s, and nobody remembers who they were: Bing Crosby, Ross Colombo, and Rudy Valley. Nobody remembers who these people are 100 years later. Burl Ives was one of the most famous folk singers of the 1950s and 1960s. He was also an actor. He won an award, an Academy Award for Best Actor in, I can't remember the movie. It was based on a John Steinbeck novel, East of Eden, I think it was. Andy Williams, he had his own show on NBC. Every Monday night, my mom was addicted to him. She always watched his show on Monday night. Brenda Lee, back in the 1960s, she had the 3rd highest number of top 10 hits after Elvis and the Beatles. A lot of people don't know that. If anybody asks you the trivia question, who had the most hit singles of the 1960s? Answer number 1 was Elvis, number 2 was the Beatles, and number 3 was Brenda Lee. That's why nobody remembers who these people are except at Christmas time. At Christmas time, you listen to the Christmas feed on Weeby 108 or any one of the local train stations, you will hear every one of these singers, because they all had one Christmas song that became an eternal hit. Bing Crosby, of course, White Christmas. Burl Ives, Have a Holly Jolly Christmas. Andy Williams, that stupid song about Hickory Dickory Dock, whatever. And Brenda Lee, Rocking Around the Christmas Tree. Okay. These are people who are some of the most famous artists of their time, but the only reason anyone remembers them today is because of that one Christmas song that they probably recorded in a studio, maybe in 10 minutes or something like that. It was a throwaway thing. Oh, let's do a Christmas song. Christmas is coming. I got to have something. That was the thing that made them eternal. Okay. The key is genius, giving the customer what they want without sacrificing your product quality. When someone commissions you to do something, you throw your talent and your genius into it. And that's what makes it a great work of art, not the fact that it was a commissioned work of art. Stephen King, great horror writer, has written, I think, over 65 novels. He's still going strong and well into his 80s, versus Peter Straub, who at one time was Stephen King's greatest competitor back in the 70s and early 80s, and he kind of pooped out in his 40s and 50s. You hardly ever see anything by him anymore. So that's my little diatribe. It's a little bit of a digression, but making money is not inconsistent with being a great artist. Make money and then throw your talent and genius into what people tell you to do, ask you to do, and that's how you become a great artist. Okay, just like Mozart did. There are three ways that artists make money. They make their money by performing their art, especially in the performing arts, music and theater. They do it by selling their art in galleries or arts and crafts fairs, art fairs, whatever. But the biggest way that artists make money is by licensing their copyright, their publishing rights, and getting royalties on those things. This last way is the key to long-standing success because it provides a steady cash flow over the long term. When an artist sells a painting at a gallery, they cannot sell that same painting again a second time. But if they retain the copyright to that painting, they can make lithographs, seriographs. There are ways that they can continue to make money off of that painting, even though they sold the actual original, oil on canvas, is what they did. Here's a pop culture question. I keep asking these questions. What is the highest grossing American stage play of all time? Okay. You're going to have a tough time with this one, specifically non-musical. Okay, musicals are a total tyranny. When I talk about a stage play, I'm talking about dialogue only, no music. Okay, what is the highest grossing American stage play of all time? You'd be surprised by the answer. In fact, I'll even give you a hint. Okay, it was on Broadway in the 1940s. It featured an A-list Hollywood actor in the cast. It featured an A-list Hollywood actor in the cast, and it folded after 6 weeks. It was a flop. It didn't go anywhere. But it's the highest grossing American stage play of all time. In terms of making money, nothing has ever beat this play. Okay. In fact, I'll even give you the name of the playwright because I guarantee you've never heard of him. His name was Joseph Kesselring. Was the name of his play, was the name of the author. Okay, anybody give up on this? I'm not seeing any activity in the chat room, which is okay. The play, believe it, is Arsenic and Old Lace. The comedy about the crazy family. The son thinks he's Teddy Roosevelt, and they're killing off these single men and they're burying them in the basement and stuff like that. It's a horror comedy. It played on Broadway for only 6 weeks. Boris Karloff was in the original cast. It closed after 6 weeks, didn't go anywhere, but virtually every high school, college, dramatic society, amateur theatrical society, any theater group operating in the United States today has done Arsenic and Old Lace at least once. It is a play that didn't go anywhere, but had a huge afterlife in repertory theater. I'm trying to go to the different art forms. I don't know who's on this call in terms of what media you're into. So I'm trying to give you examples. Here's the bottom line here. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this hour that we have together, it's this. The key to any success for any creative business is to control and exploit the intellectual property rights to the artworks rather than the works themselves. When you create a work of art, you create two things. You're creating the actual physical thing that you are doing, the work of the painting, the photograph, the script if it's a play, the sheet music, the music if it's a musical work. Okay, but you're also creating something else. You're creating intellectual property rights, specifically copyright. to that thing. And the two things are separate. Where you make your money is on the second thing, on the intellectual property rights. Let's dig this down. Okay. Um, okay. I actually should have put this thing beforehand. Okay. This is kind of going backwards a little bit, and I apologize at that. Successful artists tailor their art to what their customers want, creating only what sells. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, Mozart didn't put quill to parchment until, a rich nobleman handed him a few ducats to write whatever he was. Two famous composers, George Gershwin versus Arnold Schoenberg. Some of you know George Gershwin was a very popular composer of the 1920s and 1930s. He used jazz idiom in a lot of his pieces. Arnold Schoenberg, Viennese, Austrian composer, later became American. He fled the Nazis during the 1930s, was the inventor of 12-tone serialism. If you have ever attended a concert of music that is written in the 12-tone serial style, it's very much like having a root canal without Novocaine. It is very dissonant, very atonal. No one has ever called Schoenberg's music beautiful. If anyone ever gives you a ticket to either a Gershwin concert or a Schoenberg concert, which one are you going to say yes to? You're going to say yes to the Gershwin. Keep in mind the audience does count. There are some artists who believe, well, the audience doesn't count. If they don't get it, that's their problem. But it's very hard to sell art if the public doesn't get what you're doing. Build a recognizable brand image to rebuild repeat sale. Thomas Kincaid, a very good example. Joseph Haydn wrote over 104 symphonies, but they were all kind of similar. He didn't just write each one from his head. He had a template which he followed, and he plugged different themes and stuff into it. That's why he was able to write so quickly and grind out a lot of work so quickly. And then finally, control the intellectual property rights, the copyright to all of their work. Those of you who are Taylor Swift fans know that she lost the copyright to a lot of her early music because she had an agent that treated her badly or whatever. And what she ended up doing was she ended up forming her own production company and then re-recording a lot of her earlier hits so that they would qualify as new works of art so that she could control the copyright of that. The Beatles did not do that. Brian Epstein, their first manager, was a very poor businessman, a very poor businessman. He ended up selling the Beatles catalog for their early hits, like from 1962 to 1964, 65, the Beatlemania era. He ended up selling that to somebody that put together a trust that was going to keep the copyrights in perpetuity, but it fell apart. The person he dealt with was a crook. He ended up stealing the Beatles catalog. That's why eventually Michael Jackson, of all people, back in the 70s, early 80s, ended up paying for the Beatles catalog. For years, he owned all the rights to the Beatles' early hits. Paul McCartney, Sir Paul, finally bought them back, I think, in the mid-1990s or late. It was right after Michael Jackson died. He bought the song rights back from Michael Jackson's estate. So for over almost 30 years, the Beatles did not have the right to their own music from the early days. Everything that was pre-Apple got caught up in this thing. That's why they formed Apple Music, was because they wanted to make sure they controlled the copyright going forward. So let's talk about copyright now. The best way that I can do this, because I like to think visually, is I want you to picture a hologram. Let's say here, the Mona Lisa. Okay, you all know what the Mona Lisa looks like. I want to pretend that we have the Mona Lisa on a table. Okay, it's lying flat on a table. It's the original Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci, the brushworks. We borrowed it from the Louvre in Paris to take this to do this experiment. Okay, we have this. Got the Mona Lisa lying on its side on a table. Now picture, if you will, 3 feet above the painting, a hologram of the Mona Lisa. The hologram looks exactly like the Mona Lisa, right down to its last brushstroke. Okay, but it's intangible. You can stick your hand through it. You can't pick it up. You can't hold it. You can't taste it. You can't smell it. It's there, but it really isn't there. Okay, now in your mind's eye, now that you have this image of the painting down here and the hologram up here, take the painting away and leave the hologram. That is my little visual demonstration of what a copyright is. A copyright is intangible. It doesn't really exist, but it contains all the intellectual property rights to that work of art, and it can be sold and dealt with independently of the actual work. When you sell a work of art to somebody, you lose the right to sell the physical thing, but you still retain the copyright. Okay. Copyrights have nothing to do with ownership. A lot of people think, oh, copyright means you own the work. That's not strictly speaking true. Copyrights are a different legal animal. What they are is a legal monopoly. Now, you know, we live in a capitalist society. Monopolies are considered to be bad things because if a certain company controls all the market for a certain product, they can charge whatever they want to. They cheat consumers out of their hard-earned savings, whatever. We don't like monopolies. That's why we have a body of antitrust law designed to protect people against, companies that develop monopoly power where they can do this. But here's a situation where monopoly is a good thing. This is a monopoly that the government gives you. And there are several. There's patents, there's trademarks, but for creative artists, the copyrights are the ones you really want to focus on. It's the legal right to exclude others from profiting from a creative work for a period of time, and the period of time varies depending on the work of art. My program next week that I'm going to be doing will deal exclusively with copyright. So I know you're going to have some copyright questions, but if you can, hold them until next week, because I'm going to be doing a whole hour just on copyright. It's the most important subject that you deal with when you have a creative business. Being a successful creative artist means knowing a little bit of something about copyright law and how it works, because that's how you get rich, is not from selling the work of art itself, it's from the copyrights. Is how you get wealthy. It is literally, here's a situation where a word in law actually means what it says. A copyright is the right to make copies. That's what it is. It's the right to publish the work and make copies of it and profit from those copies. It has nothing to do with the work itself. An artist can still sell a painting in a gallery and still retain the copyright. A lot of artworks were destroyed by the Nazis during World War II, but their copyrights live on. Their images still live on in some cases, and there are people, estates mostly, because the artists are mostly dead by now. But there are estates that are still making money over artworks that were destroyed years ago. A lot of the fires in Los Angeles destroyed a lot of works of arts and famous people's homes who live out there. But those copyrights are still out there, and the artists can still make money, even though the works of art themselves were burned up in the Los Angeles fires. It contains a bundle of rights which change over time. But the thing is, it's intangible. You can't touch a copyright. You can't feel it. It's a legal right. It's a legal right, but it represents the right to make copies and the right to make money. An artist can sell a painting at a gallery, but if they still own the copyright, they can make serigraphs, lithographs. They can do anything that they want to exploit that image, and nobody else can. So, for example, if I buy a painting from you at a gallery and you do a series of 500 lithographs, I cannot stop you. Stop you from doing this. Okay. That's the thing. You still have the right you have the right. I cannot take that from you. I cannot do a series of serigraphs and lithographs on that painting, even though I own the actual physical object. You are the one who has the copyright, and you can shut me down if I try to do that. Okay, that's the beauty of owning the copyright, and why you never want to give your copyrights away unless you're making a lot of money. You're not making the same mistake that Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, did back in the 60s. Okay, what does copyright protect? Original works of authorship. And it attaches at creation. The minute you write a literary, dramatic, musical, artistic work, a song, a poem, doesn't matter how long it is, a haiku with 17 syllables can be a copyrightable. There's no limit as to length of anything like that. Computer software also is copyrighted, also works of architecture. You can actually copyright a building design. Nobody in the world can do a building that looks exactly like the Chrysler building in New York, down to the last detail, unless they get the permission of the copyright owner to do that. What copyright does not protect is ideas. It doesn't. So, for example, if I decide to write a book based on a young boy who discovers he's a wizard and he goes off to this wizarding school where he learns all kinds of crazy things and makes all kind of new friends, as long as I'm not using the name and the details of the Harry Potter novels, there's nothing that J.K. Rowling can do to me. Basically, in fact, somebody has actually done that. An author named Lev Grossman, who writes a lot of science fiction and fantasy novels. A number of years ago, he wrote a series of books called The Magician. There were three. It was a trilogy that was basically almost exactly the plot of Harry Potter, except that the young boy in this case was in college when he discovered that he was a wizard, and he went off to a wizarding university as opposed to a K through 10, a K through 12 school, which is what Hogwarts was. I mean, Lev Grossman kind of borrowed that idea, but no lawsuits, no copyright infringement, nothing, because his characters were all different than the J.K. Rowling characters. He didn't use the same name. He didn't use the same world. Basically, the Lev Grossman books are Harry Potter with sex, is basically what they are. But perfectly okay. As long as I don't steal any of J.K. Rowling's specific, stuff, there's nothing that she can do with me. The idea of a book about a kid who discovers he's a wizard and has all these adventures is something that anybody can still do, but you got to be careful about it, obviously. I do have a copyright video up on YouTube. Frankly, though, you may want to wait because it's going to be pretty much the same program that I'm doing next week. Wait for me to do it live. I have updated a little bit, and then you can go back and watch my YouTube video. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about copyright versus trademark because this confuses a lot of people. Copyright protects works of authorship, original works of authorship. Trademark protects marks. These are brand images used in commerce, which may be works of art. I mean, the Pillsbury Doughboy is a trademark of, I can't remember, Pillsbury, whoever owns Pillsbury. They may be a work of art, and they may be, copyrightable. But the fact is that they're really images that are used to sell goods and services is what they are. An author of a graphic novel. This is what I always tell people. This is the way to think of it differently. An author of a graphic novel, a comic book, can copyright the text. They can copyright the graphics, but they may be able to trademark a recurring character. So Mickey Mouse is a registered trademark of Walt Disney Company. And believe me, Walt Disney is very, very protective of its trademarks. One of the sayings in trademark law is you don't mess with the mouse. You do not. You do not play around with that. If you're doing something with a character that looks a little too much like Mickey Mouse, Walt Disney has wonderful lawyers, and they're going to come after you for that. There are certain people in this world that you do not mess with, and Walt Disney is definitely one of them. You may be able to trademark an artist's look and feel. I know Thomas Kincaid tried to do this back in the 90s, and he wasn't successful at it. The trademark office does not like to give trademarks for things that are just general look and feel type of things. If you want to copyright a specific painting, no problem at all. But if you're trying to trademark an artist's look and feel, so that anybody who does something that looks similar, the trademark office historically has not been very accepting of those kinds of claims. By the way, here's what copyright gives you: the exclusive right to publish and make copies of the work, the exclusive right to profit from the work, and also derivative works, which are works that are based on the original work of art. So, for example, fan fiction is a lot of derivative works. If I do a novel about the characters in the Starship Enterprise, the Star Trek world, for example, where they're doing all kinds of different things, they're visiting all kinds of different planets that are not in any of the original Star Trek movies or TV shows or anything like that, that is considered a derivative work. And if I do that, I do owe royalties to the Star Trek people, whoever owns the copyright on Star Trek. I do owe them royalties on that. It also gives you the exclusive right to edit, alter, or change the work. So let's say, for example, I do a sculpture, and I do it for a town, a city, and they put it up there, and it just doesn't it just doesn't capture the public imagination. People don't like it. They think it's ugly. They're painting all kinds of slogans on the side of it. And let's say the city comes to me and says, "Hey, Cliff, this thing is just too bloody ugly. You got to clean this up a little bit, make it look a bit more attractive." Only I have the right to do that. They cannot go in on their own and change the work unless I sold them the copyright. If I didn't sell them the copyright, if I just sold them the statue, they cannot make changes to it. I can say no, no, that's my vision. I don't want it changed at all. If the people don't like it, well, screw it. Then just take it down, put it in you paid for it. It's yours. Put it in the basement, melt it down. I don't really care. But I still own the copyright on it. You can't change it without my permission. It also gives you the exclusive right to sue others who infringe your copyright and make them pay through the nose, is what you want them to do. So if I am, if I have written a novel or whatever, and I see somebody out there that does something that is a blatant ripoff of what I am doing, and they haven't paid me anything for it, I can sue them in court and get them to cease and desist. There are cases where courts have actually enjoined publication of a work. They've actually stopped the printing presses and brought everything to a screeching halt and prohibited the publisher from publishing the book until they worked out a royalty settlement with the copyright owner. I could cite you cases of that. How do you profit from copyright? Well, a copyright can either be sold or assigned. So I'm sorry, a copyright can either be sold or licensed. Okay, those are the two ways that you can make money off of a copyright. If you sell the copyright or assign the copyright, you no longer own it. All those rights that I talked about in the last slide, you have given to somebody else and they have the right. So for example, if you are a novelist, a first-time novelist, and you find a publisher, congratulations if you do, the publisher is going to make you sign this 30-page contract, and in there is going to be an assignment of copyright where you are transferring not just the manuscript, but your copyright to the publisher, and the publisher is the one who makes money making all the copies. And of course, you get a royalty on that. Hopefully it's a good one. You are getting something out of it, but the publisher now owns the copyright. That is why whenever I've written 17 books, like Bob said in my introduction here. Whenever I do a publishing contract, I always put a clause in there that's saying if the publisher ceases to publish the work, if they're not making money off it, whatever, they stop the printing presses, they stop making copies of the book, or if the sales fall below X units per year, I have the right to get the copyright back upon demand. I always put that clause in there. I mean, because otherwise, you think about it, they publish your book for 5 years, they stop publishing it, you no longer have the copyright. You can't take over that and do a self-published version of it. You have to ask for their permission to make money off of your own book. So I always put that clause in. This is for the writers out there. Whenever you assign or sell a copyright to somebody else, called a reversion clause. An attorney it's a very simple clause. An attorney can do it for you in 5 minutes, saying that if they're no longer aggressively marketing the work, you then get the right to get the work back and publish it yourself. Be careful when posting on social media, by the way. Many social media sites, including Facebook, require you to assign copyright to all postings in their users agreement. A lot of people don't know this, but when you post a photo or a painting, a picture of a painting, you may be assigning some of your copyright to Facebook. Now, Facebook isn't interested in making money off of its images. I mean, the reason why they put that in their contract is because they may want to do something like, here are the 100 top Facebook, Facebook postings of all time, and they want to be able to include your thing in it without having to get your permission. That's why that clause is there. They're not looking to get into the business of ripping people off and that kind of thing. At least we hope they're not. With Mr. Zuckerberg, one never knows. But the thing is, you got to be aware that you're doing that. So be very careful before you post. I mean, I always tell my artists and especially my photography clients to do is, by all means, promote your work on Facebook, social media, TikTok, wherever, but have a link to your website where the photo is. Don't put the photo itself up on Facebook or social media. Have a link to your website where people can look on your website to see your photo, because that's when you're in control. When it's on your website, you're in charge of the rights. You can create whatever rights you want to on your website. I spend a lot of my time doing website legal documents for people's websites. I spend a lot of time doing that, the privacy policy, the terms of use, whatever, but when you put something up on Facebook, it's Facebook's users agreement and privacy policy that governs, not yours. So just keep that in mind. Now, what about licensing? Licensing is the better way to go. If you have a choice between selling your copyright and licensing it, license it. You retain all rights except those that you specifically grant to the licensee. Take a look at my copyright notice, by the way. At the very bottom of each slide, you'll see a copyright notice, copyright 2017 to 25 by Clifford R. Ennico, all rights reserved. What that all rights reserved means is that whatever rights I'm not giving you to this presentation, I retain. So I am not selling my copyright to you. You can look at this, you can take notes, you can take screenshots of the slides. I don't care about that. But if I see you using these slides to make money for yourself, my lawyers are going to be all over you, because you do not have the right to do that. I am not giving you any copyright whatsoever. The copyright notice tells the world, I am retaining this copyright. You're not getting that just because you're attending a SCORE seminar. Okay. The license automatically expires unless both parties, license is always for a term of years. It can be whatever you want to, but the license expires at some point. You get those rights back when the license expires. Okay. So let's talk about artist contracts. This is for most of you, who are doing visual arts, paintings, photographs, that kind of stuff. Generally, when you sell through galleries and expositions, you consign the works to the galleries, but they never get the copyright, and they should never get the copyright. You should dictate the terms of sale. So, for example, the gallery can't sell your painting for less than X dollars. The gallery never, sells the copyright, but if it's a large gallery, they may want the right to create authorized reproductions. So, with your authorization, you get to proofread, you get to approve the seriagraphs. That's why your signature is on there and whatnot. Also, make sure the gallery maintains insurance. God forbid you spend a year of your life creating 10 works of art, you consign them to a gallery, and the gallery burns down. At that point, you have lost a lot. You still have the copyrights, but those works can no longer be sold. Make sure the gallery maintains insurance against fire, theft, that kind of stuff. Whenever you're selling anything through agents and reps, always make sure the agent cannot bind you to a deal without your consent. If the agent asks for an exclusive, don't give them the exclusive without getting some kind of a guarantee, a minimum sales performance clause that says that they will generate at least, so much income for you a year. Otherwise, you'll terminate the license, and you'll hire somebody else to rep your work. And make sure that either side can terminate the contract on 30 days prior days notice. If you're just not happy with what the agent or rep is doing for you, you're not satisfied with their performance for any reason, whether you're right or wrong, putting this clause in means that worst case, all you have to do is give them notice. 30 days later, they're gone. You can hire somebody else. Okay. Book contracts with publishers. Just to repeat, you must assign your copyright. They will not deal with you unless you assign your copyright over to them, but they should revert to you if sales fall below a certain level. Don't give them subsidiary rights unless they are actually selling. Subsidiary rights are things like foreign translation and the right to approve derivative works. Don't do that. I mean, a lot of smaller publishers will ask for these rights when they don't even attend the Frankfurt Book Fair in Germany every year. That's the big marketplace each year for foreign rights to U.S. books and U.S. publications. They're not even attending there. They're not marketing foreign rights. So why are you giving them that right? If it's a small publisher who's only publishing in the United States, hold back on the subsidiary rights. You may be approached by somebody a year from now who wants to do a Spanish language translation of your book, and why shouldn't you have the right to deal with them? Be very careful when you read the assignment clause. Always make sure an attorney looks at this stuff. This is how we make money, is by helping you avoid legal mistakes. Be very careful because they tend to write their clause very broadly. They want the rights you want in all media, whether now existing or hereafter developed. That means that if 10 years from now, AI, we're dealing with AI, and we'll talk about AI in a minute. Um, I'm going to talk more about it next week, but let's say 5 years from now, people do brain implant chips where they can, show works of art and stuff like that in the chip. You are giving them the right to do that. You no longer have the right to negotiate with the chip company yourself. Don't give rights out that are too broad, because who knows where technology and media are going in the future. Who knows? AI is changing anything. Here's a little bit about AI, just in general. If you have generated a work via AI, you cannot copyright that portion of the work that the AI has created. The Copyright Office has handed down a very thick memo on this. They are not approving copyrights unless something was created by a human being. So a work that was generated entirely by a computer that did not involve a human hand cannot be copyrighted under current law. Now, that may change over time, but just so you know, the Copyright Office is extremely hostile. They will ask you when you file a copyright application form, was any portion of this work created by AI? And if it was, you have to be very specific about what the AI did and what you did, because you cannot copyright what the AI did. So that's becoming a very murky area of the law right now. It's very much evolving. I'll be talking more about it next week during the copyright program. Let's talk about taxes. At the very beginning of this program, we said about, if you're not a hobby, you can't take business deductions or business losses. Make sure that you are a business. I mean, if you have a hobby and you lose money, you can report the loss, but it can only be deducted against hobby income. So let's say, for example, I have an art business. I'm creating works of art. I'm selling them for very low prices at arts and crafts fairs. I'm not making any money on it, but I sell my father's stamp collection during the year, and I make $100,000 in profit from the sale of the stamp collection. The law says that I can net those two things because they were both hobby income can always be netted against hobby losses and vice versa. But hobby losses cannot be netted against any other types of income. It's kind of useless. A lot of people don't even report them on their tax return when they have hobby losses. If you're making money doing something, the IRS wants you to pay tax on it. They don't care if it's a hobby or a business. But if you're losing money, that's when the IRS cares about whether you're a hobby or a business. You can only deduct a hobby loss against hobby income, whereas a business loss can be deducted against business income. That's where the difference between a business and a hobby really has teeth. Okay. You should always be an independent contractor. Never sign a work made for hire clause when you're doing work for a customer. Otherwise, the customer can change the work without your consent. Generally speaking, if you're an employee, a W-2 employee, and you create something, intellectual property as part of your job, your boss owns that. Owns the copyright. You do not. They can do whatever they want, and if you try to make money off that, they will not only sue you for infringement, but they'll also sue you for your breach of duty as an employee. Those lawsuits get very nasty. There's a famous Supreme Court case. This is the case actually that I alluded to about the sculptor who creates the sculpture for a municipality. Nobody likes the sculpture. They want to change it, but they have to go back to the artist for permission to change the sculpture. This was a U.S. Supreme Court case from 1989, Community for Creative Nonviolence versus Reed. For those of you who are Supreme Court junkies, it was oh, come on. The famous Black Supreme Court justice who did Brown versus Board of Education. I'm blanking out on his name right now. This is the problem with old age, but it was his last opinion that he wrote on the Supreme Court before he retired was this case. Reed was a sculptor. He created a sculpture of a homeless family for an organization in Washington. They put it up in front of their building. Nobody liked it. They basically had another sculptor come in and change it. Reed sued, saying, wait a minute, I sold you the sculpture, but I didn't sell you the copyright. You cannot change this without my consent. And he won. The Supreme went all the way up to the Supreme Court that ruled in his favor. Learn what you can deduct and what you can't. There's a nice website that I found called freelancetaxation.com, where it tells you exactly. So if you're a painter, for example, you put in, a painter, graphic artist, photographer, whatever, and it gives you sort of a laundry list of all the things you can and can't deduct, and it's pretty good and it's pretty up to date. There's also some good books out there on tax deductions for artists. You can get them on Amazon. Take advantage of it. Learn what you can deduct and what you can't. Can you take the new 20% deduction on qualifying business income? This is something that came out of the 2017 Trump tax bill. It's up for extension this year. There's a big argument about it. Generally speaking, if you're making money on work that you created yourself, you do not qualify for that 20% deduction on qualifying small business income. All right. Basically, keeping lawsuits at bay. I'm just going to give a minute on this, and then we'll take some questions. If you infringe somebody else's copyright, you will be sued. So don't steal somebody else's stuff. Avoid basing characters on real life figures or fictional characters that were written by people like J.K. Rowling, who are billionaires and who can sue anybody that they want to. Okay, so great art and business success are not incompatible. Give your customers what they want, create only what sells, build a recognizable brand image so that when people see your paintings in a gallery, oh, that's a Cliff Ennico. That's definitely a Cliff Ennico. You want that recognition. Keep control of your copyrights at all costs, and don't steal other people's stuff or base characters on real life people or fictional characters that were created by people who are a lot more powerful than you do and have lawyers who can shut you down. So with that, that's all I have to say for today. I know a lot of you guys probably have copyright questions. Next week, it's all going to be about copyright, and I am going to be, 60 minutes. The again, so I see a couple of things. I'm sorry that I blanked out. It was the judge that wrote the Reed decision was the first Black member of the Supreme Court. He's the guy that wrote the opinion in Brown versus. He didn't write the opinion, but he argued the case in Brown versus Board of Education, the great racial discrimination case, and he was ultimately admitted to the Supreme Court years later. I'm sorry, I just blanked out on his name. This is old age. We call those senior moments. I'm just going to look in the Q&A here.
Okay, thanks, Duff. We're going to use the remaining time for Q&A. We'll take as many as we can, and we'll go a couple minutes over because we were late starting here. So just remember to put them in using the Q&A button, and we'll just take as many as we can. Cliff, the first one is from Ed. You were talking about copyright and hang on to that, and he is asking, how about guarding the scientific and technical creativity?
You can copyright certain works of scientific. So for example, if you write an abstract or something like that, that is a copyrightable work that you can do. But the real question is, can you patent the underlying technology that you are doing? If you're writing software code, for example, you can copyright the actual code, but the real question is, can you patent it? Which is really different. Can you prevent someone else from doing something similar using similar code? A lot of software developers do not file copyright applications for their work with the Copyright Office because once you copyright it, it's published. And it's very tempting for some people, especially in foreign countries, to steal that, change a few lines of code, and they've written around your copyright. So if you're doing that kind of stuff, talk to an attorney who's not just a copyright attorney, but who works with scientific stuff.
And Ed has also volunteered that the answer to your Chief Justice question is Thurgood Marshall.
Thurgood Marshall, thank you, and thank you to Ed Watkins for mentioning it was Thurgood Marshall who wrote the Reed case. It was his last opinion before he retired from the Supreme Court. What is the guidance regarding quoting something copyrighted? That's a whole area called fair use, which we're going to be spending a lot of time on next week. I'll give you one sentence on it right now. Generally speaking, there are circumstances in which you can use somebody else's copyright material and not have to pay royalties to that person, but only if it constitutes fair use as the law defines that. I have a book in my library that is this thick on the fair use doctrine in the United States and all the cases that have determined, yeah, this is fair use. No, that is not fair use. It's a very subjective kind of thing. After a while, you get really good at knowing what's fair use and what isn't. But when you're first starting out, don't just assume that something is fair use. So for example, if I write a satire of a famous novel, Okay, I write a silly version of a famous novel, but I don't use a lot of the copyrighted material that was in that book. A court might decide that that was fair use and not a derivative work of the original book because it's a satire and it stands on its own as an independent literary work. Those are very difficult court cases, and we're going to spend a lot of time next week talking about that. This is just the introductory program today. We're just talking about general stuff. We're going to dig down into copyright next week, and then the week following, we're going to be dealing with trademark too, because it is. Go ahead.
Yeah, we have one here from York. How do you recommend a new business owner pivot into advanced consulting so that NDAs and confidentiality agreements are designed prior to engaging cybersecurity concerns?
Wow, that is an interesting question. Okay, well, first of all, NDAs and confidentiality agreements should always be thought through. A lot of people just grab standard forms off the web and just use them without thinking. They think that it's all, boilerplate stuff. It isn't. I actually spend a lot of time, crafting. I have over 500 different forms of NDA and confidentiality agreement for different situations. An NDA that you use for a business acquisition is very different than an NDA that you use for software development. You're looking to protect different kinds of intellectual property. I mean, to answer the biggest answer to your question is that you should always, no matter what your field is in consulting, you should always talk to an attorney to make sure that your standard form of NDA confidentiality agreement reflects the stuff that you really want to protect. So for example, if you're a software developer and there's a reference in the NDA to protecting customer lists, that's not something that you're looking to protect. What you want to protect is what you are creating for that person and making it very clear that you can do stuff with the copyright, but without their permission, and being very specific about what that is. So that's a very short answer. We'll
take one. We'll take one more, and then we're over time. But here's one from FL Accountant. License my paintings to be printed on shower curtains, sort of thing. How do we know the license company is legit?
Oh, wow. That's just it. First of all, if you have the copyright to your painting, you can definitely have them reproduced on shower curtains. That's not a problem at all. But finding out what there's legit, you have to do due diligence on them. Always ask for references. Ask them to talk to other artists that they've worked with. There are a lot of fly-by-night people out there. There are people that are looking to steal your stuff and use it somewhere else. Be very specific. Be very careful when licensing things to China right now, or Vietnam, or some of these other countries, because the copyright laws over there are not as strong as they are in the US, and they may give their citizens the right to do stuff with your paintings that a US court would never allow you to do here. So just be very, very careful. Do your diligence. It's like with any kind of partnership or strategic alliance with another company, do your diligence on the other company. Don't just trust what they say on their website. I think that's good advice for anybody, not just a creative business, Bob.
Okay, that's great. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time, and so that's all we'll have for today. As Cliff mentioned, he will be addressing copyright in more detail next week, and we can take more questions then. Just a reminder that the webinar has been recorded, and the materials will be available within 24 hours or so on our website under on-demand webinars. And our next live webinar will be at noon next week, Tuesday, February 18th, and Cliff will be presenting part 2 and dealing entirely with copyright. So you can find more specifics on our website. Again, if you would like to individual counseling, please use the link that you saw on the screen on Request a Mentor, and you can please fill out your evaluations. That really helps us going forward. And on behalf of SCORE, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's live webinar. And in closing, a big thank you to Cliff for presenting and introducing this series today. So enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. Thanks again, Cliff.
Thanks as always, Bob. It's always a pleasure. And please go out there and use some creative stuff. Just don't make it look too much like me, okay?
Okay, take care. Thanks.
You too. Bye-bye.